Welcome back. Now, there seems to be a blurred line between podcasting and radio, both audio content with similar styles, more or less the same genre. So it's only natural that audio content creators can, sometimes get stuck when choosing which platform to use. Radio, however, remains firmly in place as the country's most loved medium, yet more and more people are turning to digital audio formats. This in part because of an increase in access to smartphones and along with better internet and connectivity. Well, we celebrated World Radio Day on Tuesday. So this morning, we'll be discussing the high demand and influence of digital media. Now, to help us unpack and discuss this further, we're joined in studio by Abongile Cokie, manager of OTT at the SABC. Also with us from the SABC, David Mashabela, radio personality, and he's a podcaster in his own right. Gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to Morning Live. Abongile, I suppose let me start with you about radio in general and the space it occupies. I mean, we celebrated, 100 years on Tuesday. Speak to us about the power of radio.
Thanks for that question. Radio is very big, and it's got a lot of audiences, both internationally and locally. Now, with the celebration of the radio, it also fits into the aspect of understanding the impact that it has played over the years. And through that, it is only natural that we, as the people, need to just celebrate it and make sure that we keep the radio alive and supporting it at all times.
Mm-hmm. David, you've been in the space for many years. You would have seen the evolution of radio from the days when you started. You're in the perfect space to see how it's also evolved into podcasting. Tell us a little bit about how you've seen and how you've observed the evolvement of radio.
Thank you for this invitation, because I think the introduction is incorrect. The real competition is TV and podcasting.
Okay.
Radio continues to grow. Radio 2000 to 2019 was 800,000 listeners. It's now 2 million. So the growth is very clear. However, TV and linear TV is where the biggest challenge is, because South African consumers don't consume podcasts the way they were meant to. Podcasts are audio-based, but South African consumers prefer video podcasts. And a video audience competes with a video audience, which is what we're doing now. So the biggest challenge that we've seen in terms of the evolution of this is where the TV audience are the ones that are going to view a podcast online, on their radio, or rather on their phones, even on these smart TVs. When people tune into their TV, if they have a smart TV, they're likely to watch a podcast and chill and so forth. You see people coming into the podcasting space to do video podcasts, not audio podcasts. They're not as popular in South Africa. So that's why I say it's a tricky space. But the real challenge that's faced is linear TV that's going to continue to suffer this competition, largely because South Africans don't have access to data that easily. That's why it's not growing at a fast pace. And radio continues to be easy to access, cheap. You can do anything you want with your day while you're listening to it. A TV, you have to pause and watch it. And that's exactly what happens. People are watching more the podcasting. And we see a show like, again, Podcasting Chill has 15,000 people viewing at the same time. Those numbers are ridiculous because they didn't exist. Literally, that audience did not exist 5 years ago. And now it means they've migrated.
How do we then navigate that space as an institution such as the SABC, where the space is changing and that's the reality of it?
Naturally, it would change because over the years, as David has just said, people have always consumed TV. Now, with the introduction of the video on demand, which is basically your vodcasts, it then creates a lot of competition between what television is delivering versus what radio is evolving to. Because if you look at the space, especially when you look at an organization as SABC, you look at the channels that have been there from SABC 1, 2, 3, up to News and Lehigh. And then when you look at the radio, SABC has got 19 radio stations and 4 digital radio stations that are only available on the online platform. Within that, you get your podcasts, which are audio only on all the websites. So then if you miss a show on the live radio streaming or the live traditional broadcast, you can still catch that show on the podcast, which is basically audio only. Then when you go to other platforms where SABC is also playing in that space as radio, like your Ukhozi TV, then you start engaging more of what each radio station has got to offer. And then when you put them on the same scale, then you start seeing that the difference between radio and TV is slowly, the gap is slowly closing. But then the question is, what is TV going to do to counter that?
Yeah.
Because it's now becoming a TV versus radio, good, competitive, and it's also good for the industry.
Yeah. David, what are you finding in this podcasting space now that you occupied too? What are some of the lessons that you're learning there too? And what are we finding out about how South Africans consume podcasting?
Well, I'll tell you immediately, South African consumers, one, they consume podcasts on YouTube. Not as much on the audio-based, like your Spotify and so forth.
Okay.
They do, but not the numbers show more on YouTube. That means that, again, it's that video thing. And in terms of my experience on both sides, when I started my podcast, because I'd done radio for so long, I thought it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And I would then do it with the same style. And the comments made it clear that, no, it's a different world here. You know, when we do radio, we fill the quiet spaces with the
Right, yes.
and we're here, you fill it with a nod.
Yes.
So, because for some reason, video audiences don't enjoy seeing you doing a
Yeah.
They don't mind hearing it, but they don't like seeing it. It's a small thing. So even in my studio, I have this little note where I said, don't say yes, don't say just nod. It's good enough to connect with the
Yes.
audience. So it's those type of things. Video YouTube consumers, they want you to end their subscription. You don't just get it because you said, please like and subscribe.
Okay.
Your content must be good enough for them to want to subscribe. They even say, finally, you brought a guest that makes me want to subscribe. So it's all those small little things, but the audiences are different. I get more recognized for the YouTube guy than I do for radio, and yet I've been doing radio for over 20 years. I've been doing podcasting for 2 or 3 years or so. Because of that audience, one they see me because I'm visual, and also, but I'm starting to see that the growth also reflects on my radio numbers, but very slowly. So in my humble opinion, radio and podcasts, they have a perfect relationship because we take the radio content. We have cameras now in our radio studios. We shoot the stuff and then put it on our TV platform. And that's generally how this works. So I think the biggest challenge is how does that then TV counter that? But I'll tell you very immediately that SABC TV is one of the biggest platforms on YouTube. It shows you that the audience exists. It's really about how you serve them. Linear TV, I can't rewind this unless I have a fancy little thing. But on podcast, I can rewind it. I can watch it whenever I want. I can pause and go do something else and come back. So that world is where the real challenge is going to be.
How do you add on to that, where the challenge is?
So I don't see it as much of big of a challenge because now even with the features that are available in the different online, even for linear, where they do provide a bit of recording and then they avail that as a vodcast or as a VOD content, which is then speaks to the challenge of how do you then go back to a linear program that played on television. And the most commonly used in South Africa, if you've heard the term of catch up, that is basically saying to the audience, if you've missed it, you can catch it. But then at the same time, each broadcaster then is able to provide more besides what is only available on the catch-up, which is then referred to as your VOD catalog. That's why when you go to other streaming platforms, when you go in, you've got a long list of the different videos or podcasts that are available, because then they're starting to say, we've got so much of this content, both retro and modern. How do we then make it available for our audiences to start enjoying what we have available as part of our catalog?
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for talking to us. I wish we had more time. Speaking to us in studio, Abongile Cokie, manager of OTT at the SABC and radio personality and podcaster on the stark differences between radio, television, and of course, podcasting.